Supergiant hit it big with Hades, and in turn has quickly announced a sequel to its most popular game to date. But is a sequel the right move for a company currently known for its diversity in games? Let's dive in and discuss why Hades 2 might or might not be the right choice for Supergiant. Let's start with a small timeline on Supergiant's games. Their first release was Bastion in 2011, which found immediate success for the small studio that opened in 2009 due to its unique art and narration. Transistor released next in 2014, receiving over 70 plus Game of the Year nominations according to Supergiant. Their third release was Pyre in 2017, which was well received from journalists, but as we will see later, was not the hit I'm sure they were actually hoping for. And finally, Hades, which needs no introduction and formally released in 2020 after being in early access since 2018. What makes each of these Supergiant games special is that they are all very unique to each other while showing the significant growth the studio has made between each title. For me personally, before Hades came along, Transistor was and still is, to an extent, the nearest and dearest to my heart. There was just something about that story, its combat, the main protagonist Red, and its stellar soundtrack that just hit home for me. It was one of the few games that when the credits rolled, I immediately started up New Game Plus, beat it for a second time, and got the Platinum Trophy. I am not even a Platinum Trophy hunter, as there are only a few games I even actually have them on, but that's how much I love Transistor. Bastion and Pyre were also great games to me, but for different reasons because, again, they are different games, something I want to continue to hit home here. But ultimately, how I feel about Supergiant and how game outlets continue to gush about how unique a company they are while raining awards and accolades on them, they don't equate to sales, and we all know cash is king. Although even Supergiant themselves has said that they would never make a sequel for monetary reasons. So what gives, and why now? Well, let's take a look at some data. Before I start, I want to make it clear I have zero insight into how much Supergiant has made or how many copies total over time each game has sold. But if we look at Steam Spy, it paints an interesting picture. Now keep in mind this does not include consoles or Epic Games Store where they first launched early access for Hades, but one could assume that they are all probably very similar. Also, Steam Spy cannot scan private libraries, so there is the potential for a decent margin of error here, even if Steam Spy would try to tell us otherwise, but I think it's enough to get the point across. Using this as a gauge, we can see it's been a pretty big downward trend for each release out of Supergiant since Bastion, with each release doing about half as good as the game before it, and that's not a trend a studio wants to see. And of course that is until Hades came along, which absolutely dwarfs the others in comparison. Again, keep in mind this is Steam numbers of exposed libraries. Now looking at VG Insights on estimated revenues of each game for Supergiant, here the picture becomes more clear. You can see that Hades more than doubled the other three games combined. These are crazy numbers, and suddenly things start adding up. Again, these are all of unverified amounts, but there's enough data out there, and just gauging how Hades blew up across the gaming communities to know that Hades is in another solar system compared to their prior games. But the success of Hades just didn't drop out of nowhere. It was grown and molded from all their prior games. It was the accumulation of years of narrowing in and perfecting their craft. Supergiant has always been amazing at building worlds, characters, and some of the best game soundtracks out there, and all that knowledge got brought into Hades. What sets Hades apart is that they finally nailed the gameplay as well this time. They created such a fast and fun game to play. Then, through their brilliance of game design, they took the current roguelike design and looped in all the characteristics of their prior games with it, creating a stunning world, characters, and dialogues you wanted to play through over and over. That's not to say the other games were bad. I know I love them, But the numbers they do not lie. The direction they were heading was just not resonating with the masses, even if I loved and saw how each one evolved and showed their growth and talents as a studio. If Hades did not hit like it did, I could be doing a video right now on the studio that died sticking to their beliefs. So with all that said, where does that leave Supergiant? Well, they are in a very unique position where suddenly, instead of just having game journalists looking to throw more accolades that don't keep a studio doors open, they now have a lot of gamers with money in hand looking at what will be next from them, which is what every studio strives for. So Hades 2 makes complete sense, right? Well, for me, I'm still a little unsure. Let's not forget how they got here. It was the lessons learned game after game. So let's take a look at one last thing, the release schedule from earlier in the video. They are currently releasing a new game about every 3 years, which is honestly pretty good for a studio their size. But Hades 2 is set to go into early access sometime this year. If you take into consideration that Hades was in early access for about 2 years, we are now looking at a 5-year gap between Hades and Hades 2. So unless they are working on another game we're not aware of in parallel, taking this new potential timeline in consideration, we could be looking at 2030 for a new IP from the studio that was currently known for nothing but new IPs. This means about 10 years of people knowing Supergiant for one thing and one thing only, Hades. And I ask this, how do you follow that up after 10 years? That is a long time of build-up and anticipation to put on a studio like Supergiant, especially when a majority of your audience knows you for one thing at this point, which is a roguelike action game. Look, I get it. While it's tough as a fan of all their prior titles, and no matter how much it pains me, if I want Supergiant to survive, they have to strike while the iron's hot. So I do not blame them for the direction they are going. I just hope at the end of the day, it does not pigeonhole them and stint their creativity going forward, which in my mind would be the worst case scenario for me as a fan, and the death of a studio I have followed for 12 years now. All I can hope for is that they're taking this newfound money and fame from Hades and most likely Hades 2 to help fund and create the new game experiences I've grown to know and love them for. And what Supergiant needs to be doing is looking forward and turning all these newfound Hades fans into new Supergiant fans like myself, because that is ultimately how they're going to survive. So what do you think? Is Supergiant doing the right thing here? Is there enough room to improve on Hades to make a sequel worthwhile? Or should they have held on to their prior statements and avoided sequels on their prior games? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.